October 15, 1944. A dirt road outside St. Vith, Belgium. Wehrmacht Oberstreiter Hans Müller crouches behind a stone wall, his breath visible in the cold morning air. He adjusts his field glasses, scanning the horizon for what his commanding officer described as routine American supply movement. What he sees instead will define the rest of his war experience and haunt him for decades to come. A ribbon of light stretches across the landscape as far as his eyes can reach. Headlights pierce the pre-dawn darkness, hundreds of them, thousands of them, creating an unbroken chain of illumination through the Belgian countryside. American jeeps, trucks, and half-tracks moving with mechanical precision that seems almost supernatural in its consistency. The sound overwhelms everything else, a constant, thunderous roar of engines that vibrates through the ground and into his bones. Müller lowers his binoculars. His hands are trembling, but not from the October cold. Mein Gott! He whispers to his comrade beside him. They never stop. For 3 hours, Müller watches this mechanical river flow past his position. Jeeps loaded with ammunition crates. Trucks carrying fuel barrels that gleam in the morning light. Half-tracks filled with fresh American soldiers, their faces young and confident despite what must be exhaustion from driving through the night. The convoy maintains perfect spacing, each vehicle exactly 50 meters behind the next, each driver alert and focused, each load secured with military precision. At 0900 hours, Müller's unit receives orders to retreat to secondary positions. As they fall back through the forest, the sound of engines never fades. The glow of headlights continues to reflect off the low clouds. Hours later, when they establish their new defensive line 15 kilometers to the east, Müller can still see the distant lights moving across the horizon. This moment, repeated thousands of times across the European theater between 1944 and 1945, represents far more than a simple logistics operation. German soldiers weren't just witnessing American supply convoys. They were seeing the visible manifestation of an industrial transformation that had fundamentally altered the nature of warfare itself. The Americans weren't just supplying an army. They were feeding an industrial machine that never slept, never stopped, never faltered. If you're fascinated by these hidden aspects of World War II that rarely make it into conventional histories, you'll want to stay with us through this entire investigation. We're about to uncover how American industrial capacity became the decisive weapon of the war, and why German soldiers came to fear supply trucks more than enemy tanks. The first reports arrived at Wehrmacht headquarters like fragments of an impossible puzzle. Radio transmissions from forward observers, hastily scribbled notes from reconnaissance patrols, urgent telephone calls from field commanders, all describing the same bewildering phenomenon that seemed to violate every assumption about military logistics. Unending motorized columns observed moving east from Normandy beachheads, reads one intelligence report dated June 18, 1944. Conservative estimate, 500 vehicles per hour, continuous movement for 72 hours. Request confirmation of count accuracy. 500 vehicles per hour. For 72 straight hours without interruption. General Major Friedrich VI, tasked with analyzing American logistical capabilities for Army Group B, stares at the report on his desk. The mathematics are staggering, almost incomprehensible. If these numbers are accurate, and multiple independent sources are confirming similar observations across the entire front, the Americans are moving more supplies in a single week than the Wehrmacht typically manages in a month. But it's not just the raw numbers that disturb Sixt. It's the qualitative descriptions from his men in the field, reports that read more like fever dreams than military intelligence. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Hoffmann, writing in a letter later intercepted by Allied intelligence services, captures the psychological impact. The jeeps come like a plague of locusts across the countryside. Day and night, night and day, an endless stream of metal and rubber and roaring engines. We count them until our eyes burn and our minds grow numb, but there is never an end. Where do they find so many machines? Where do they find so many men to drive them? It's as if they have factories that produce soldiers and vehicles like we produce bread. Hoffmann's unit had been assigned to monitor American supply lines near Corentin as part of a routine intelligence-gathering mission. What began as straightforward battlefield reconnaissance became a psychological ordeal that would fundamentally alter how these German soldiers understood the war they were fighting. For 6 consecutive days and nights, they watched from concealed positions as American vehicles streamed past in an unbroken parade. Jeeps, trucks, half-tracks, ambulances, fuel tankers, mobile workshops, communications vehicles, an endless mechanical procession that seemed to mock every assumption they held about the limitations of military logistics. The diversity of vehicles was as shocking as their quantity. German supply operations relied heavily on horse-drawn wagons and a dwindling fleet of aging trucks that required constant maintenance and careful conservation of fuel. American convoys included specialized vehicles for every conceivable military function. Mobile kitchens that could feed a battalion while moving down a highway. Workshop trucks equipped with lathes and welding equipment for field repairs. Communications vehicles bristling with radio antennae. Medical evacuation jeeps modified with stretcher mounts and medical supplies. A classified Wehrmacht assessment, dated July 3, 1944, attempts to quantify what German forces are witnessing across multiple sectors. American mechanized logistics exceed all previous intelligence estimates by factor of 300 to 400%. Current supply capacity suggests enemy capability to maintain offensive operations indefinitely without regard to traditional logistical constraints. Immediate strategic reassessment of defensive priorities strongly recommended. Factor of 300 to 400%. The German High Command had fundamentally misunderstood what they were facing. This wasn't merely superior numbers or better equipment. This represented a completely different conception of how modern warfare could be conducted. The Americans had apparently solved the ancient military problem of supply constraints through sheer industrial abundance. Feldwebel Otto Kruger, a veteran of campaigns in Poland, France, and Russia, writes in his diary after a failed ambush attempt near St. Lo. "We destroyed 12 American jeeps today with a carefully planned attack. Felt victorious for perhaps 10 minutes, thought we had struck a meaningful blow against their logistics. Then 50 more vehicles appeared around the next bend in the road. Then 50 more after that. It's like trying to stop the ocean tide with sandbags. They just keep coming, an endless stream of metal and machinery that makes our small victories feel meaningless." The psychological impact on German troops extended far beyond simple discouragement. These were soldiers trained to believe in the superiority of German engineering, German organization, and German military doctrine. They had conquered most of Europe through tactical innovation and superior coordination. But tactical brilliance meant nothing when the enemy could replace losses faster than you could inflict them. Gefreiter Klaus Weber, in a letter to his sister dated September 12, 1944, captures the existential bewilderment. "You ask when I will come home from this war, but I can no longer answer such questions because I no longer understand what kind of war we are fighting. The Americans operate as if they have unlimited everything, unlimited fuel, unlimited ammunition, unlimited vehicles, unlimited replacement soldiers. How does one defeat unlimited? How does one fight against an enemy that treats jeeps like we treat rifle cartridges, discarding them when broken and immediately replacing them with new ones?" The contrast with German logistics was becoming increasingly stark and demoralizing. Wehrmacht units were receiving ammunition rationed by individual rounds. Fuel allocations were measured in liters and carefully husbanded for essential operations only. Vehicles were repaired and re-repaired until they could no longer function, then cannibalized for parts to keep other vehicles operational. German soldiers were issued bicycle repair kits because walking had become more common than motorized transport. Meanwhile, American forces seemed to operate under entirely different rules. They abandoned vehicles with minor mechanical problems rather than attempting field repairs. They used jeeps for non-essential transport that German forces would have conducted on foot. They maintained vehicles in pristine condition through regular replacement of parts that German mechanics would have continued using until catastrophic failure. The German High Command was asking the same strategic questions that plagued frontline soldiers. Intelligence reports from Army Group B headquarters reveal growing desperation in their analysis of American capabilities. Enemy logistics appear immune to conventional interdiction efforts. Destruction of individual vehicles has no measurable impact on overall supply flow effectiveness. Road networks east of Normandy report continuous vehicular traffic 24 hours daily for past 6 weeks without interruption. Recommend shifting anti-logistics efforts from individual vehicle targets to infrastructure, bridges, fuel depots, maintenance facilities, as tactical vehicle destruction proves strategically irrelevant. But even infrastructure attacks proved largely ineffective against American logistical resilience. American engineering units rebuilt bridges faster than German forces could destroy them, often completing repairs overnight and returning damaged routes to full operational capacity within hours. Fuel depots were defended by dedicated security units and dispersed across multiple locations to prevent catastrophic losses. Maintenance facilities operated around the clock with sufficient redundancy that damage to individual workshops barely impacted overall repair capacity. The reality behind what German soldiers were witnessing was even more extraordinary than they could imagine. In factories across the United States, an industrial transformation was reshaping the global balance of military power with unprecedented speed and scale. The Willis Overland plant in Toledo, Ohio, had achieved something that seemed impossible by traditional manufacturing standards, producing one complete Jeep every 80 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. By the end of 1943, American factories had manufactured over 200,000 Jeeps. By war's end, that number would exceed 650,000 vehicles, more than the total vehicle production of Germany, Japan, and Italy combined throughout the entire war. But Jeeps represented only a fraction of American industrial output. Ford's Willow Run plant was completing one B-24 Liberator bomber every hour. General Motors had converted its entire automobile production infrastructure to manufacture aircraft engines, artillery shells, and military vehicles. Chrysler was producing tanks. Even smaller companies had been retooled for military production, typewriter manufacturers building machine guns, piano companies producing aircraft wings, toy makers assembling precision instruments for military equipment. The logistics of transporting this industrial output to European battlefields constituted an equally revolutionary achievement. The Red Ball Express, a dedicated truck route system running from Normandy beaches to frontline positions, was moving 12,500 tons of supplies per day by August 1944. Individual convoys consisted of 40 to 50 vehicles, spaced exactly 100 yards apart, maintaining constant speeds of 35 miles per hour regardless of weather, road conditions, or enemy action. These weren't improvised supply runs managed by harried quartermasters. This was precision industrial coordination implemented on a scale never before attempted in human history. Every vehicle carried detailed manifests. Every load had documented destinations and estimated arrival times. Every driver followed standardized procedures for vehicle maintenance, cargo security, and route navigation. Captain Robert Hayes, a logistics officer with the First Army, describes the systematic nature of American supply operations in his official report. Vehicles are loaded, dispatched, and routed with the precision of a railroad timetable. We maintain comprehensive documentation for every truck, every jeep, every pound of cargo moving through our supply network. Nothing moves without proper authorization, destination coordinates, and estimated delivery schedule. The entire system operates with mechanical efficiency that eliminates guesswork and improvisation. The contrast with German logistics was becoming catastrophically apparent to Wehrmacht commanders. German supply operations were increasingly dependent on horse-drawn wagons as fuel shortages grounded motorized transport. German soldiers received ammunition counted by individual rounds rather than by cases or crates. German mechanics cannibalized multiple broken vehicles to create single functional machines. The industrial gap wasn't just significant, it represented different epochs of military capability. Oberst Heinrich Müller commanded a panzer unit that attempted to intercept American supply convoys near Falaise in August 1944. His after-action report, captured by Allied forces, provides a German perspective on the futility of traditional anti-logistics operations. Attacked American supply column at 0530 hours with full strength available, 4 Panzer IVs and supporting infantry. destroyed first 12 vehicles in convoy before encountering organized resistance. Expected convoy to halt operations, reorganize defensive posture, or retreat to secure positions. Instead, destroyed vehicles were immediately pushed off roadway by following traffic. Column continued forward movement without measurable interruption. Total delay inflicted on enemy logistics operations, approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes. An entire German armored attack, risking valuable panzer tanks and experienced crews that could not be easily replaced, had delayed American supply operations by 4 minutes. The mathematical implications were devastating. At that rate of effectiveness, German forces would need to conduct successful anti-logistics attacks every 4 minutes, around the clock, simply to halt American supply operations temporarily. The psychological impact on German troops was correspondingly catastrophic. Gefreiter Klaus Weber, the soldier who had written to his sister about fighting unlimited resources, provides additional insight in subsequent letters. We have begun to understand that we are not fighting American soldiers. We are fighting American factories. Every jeep we destroy is replaced by 3 more. Every truck we damage is abandoned and replaced immediately. They fight like people who have so much equipment that individual losses mean nothing. We fight like people who must preserve every bullet, every drop of fuel, every functioning vehicle, because replacement is impossible. This realization was spreading throughout German units exposed to American logistics operations. Soldiers who had previously viewed individual tactical victories as meaningful contributions to the war effort now understood that their actions had virtually no strategic impact. Destroying a dozen American vehicles was tactically satisfying but strategically irrelevant when hundreds more appeared within hours. Wehrmacht morale reports from late 1944 document the psychological consequences of this realization. A confidential assessment filed by Wehrmacht psychiatrist Dr. Ernst Hoffmann reveals the scope of the crisis. Soldiers consistently report symptoms consistent with learned helplessness when discussing enemy supply capabilities. Common expressions include pointless to resist, they have infinite resources, and we are fighting a machine rather than an army. Psychological evaluation suggests widespread belief that individual military action cannot influence war outcome. Recommend immediate rotation of affected units before defeatist attitudes spread to unaffected formations. But there were no unaffected formations available for replacement duty, and no reserve units available for rotation. The German army was simultaneously undermanned, under-equipped, and psychologically overwhelmed by the sheer scale of American material superiority. The human cost of maintaining American logistical superiority was enormous, though largely invisible to the German soldiers who witnessed only the results. American truck drivers were working 18-hour shifts, navigating through combat zones without adequate rest, constantly threatened by German aircraft, artillery, and ground attacks. Private First Class James Washington, a driver with the Red Ball Express, maintained a diary that provides insight into the personal sacrifices behind American logistics success. September 15th, third consecutive day driving from Cherbourg to Chartres without stopping except for fuel and ammunition resupply. German aircraft strafed the column twice near Avranches, but orders were to maintain convoy integrity and continue forward movement. Lost count of vehicles in our convoy somewhere around 2,000. My co-driver fell asleep at the wheel 3 times during night driving, had to physically shake him awake to prevent accidents. These men, predominantly African American soldiers assigned to transportation duties due to military segregation policies, were the invisible heroes enabling American logistical dominance. They drove through darkness without headlights to avoid German aircraft detection. They navigated bombed-out roads and hastily constructed temporary bridges. They unloaded supplies under artillery fire and immediately began return journeys for additional cargo. Sergeant Willie Robinson, also serving with the Red Ball Express, describes the relentless operational tempo. No such thing as a scheduled day off. No such thing as a complete night's sleep. You finished one convoy run, you immediately started preparations for the next. Jeeps, trucks, ambulances, fuel tankers, mobile workshops, everything had to maintain constant movement. Germans thought we possessed unlimited vehicles and unlimited drivers. Truth was, we had unlimited determination to keep supplies moving regardless of personal cost. The scale of American logistics operations was staggering by any historical measure. By October 1944, Allied forces in Europe were consuming 20,000 tons of supplies every day. Ammunition requirements alone necessitated 500 truck loads every 24 hours. Fuel consumption reached 1.2 million gallons daily. Food supplies for 2.5 million American and Allied troops required constant replenishment from sources thousands of miles away. Every individual item, every rifle cartridge, every gallon of gasoline, every can of food, every medical bandage, had to be transported from American production facilities across the Atlantic Ocean to frontline positions in Europe. The jeeps and trucks that so amazed German observers represented merely the final stage of supply chains that extended back through American ports, across shipping lanes, to factories, farms, and oil fields throughout the continental United States. By late autumn 1944, German morale reports were documenting widespread psychological breakdown among units regularly exposed to American logistics operations. The same Wehrmacht psychiatrist, Dr. Ernst Hoffmann, filed additional assessments that revealed the deepening crisis. Soldiers report persistent symptoms of demoralization when discussing enemy supply capabilities. Recurring themes include feelings of individual insignificance, tactical hopelessness, and strategic futility. Common statements include destroying their vehicles accomplishes nothing, they replace everything faster than we can destroy it, and we are fighting against unlimited production rather than limited military forces. Psychological intervention appears ineffective as soldier observations of enemy capabilities confirm their pessimistic assessments. The psychological collapse was based on accurate tactical observations. German soldiers weren't suffering from irrational defeatism. They were responding logically to overwhelming evidence that their military efforts could not significantly impact American operational capabilities. Hauptmann Wolfgang Steiner, commanding a reconnaissance unit in the Ardennes region, filed what would become his final intelligence report on November 28, 1944. American vehicle movements observed continuously for 6 days from concealed positions overlooking major supply route. Conservative count exceeds 15,000 individual vehicles of various types and configurations. Categories observed include standard jeeps, modified jeeps with specialized equipment, cargo trucks of multiple sizes, half-tracks for personnel transport, tank transporters carrying replacement vehicles, fuel tankers, ambulances, mobile command vehicles, engineering equipment transporters, and numerous specialized vehicles whose specific functions could not be determined from observation distance. All vehicles appeared to be new or recently manufactured. All crews appeared alert and adequately supplied despite continuous operations. Tactical conclusion: enemy logistical capacity appears unlimited from German perspective. 15,000 vehicles observed by a single reconnaissance unit during 6 days of continuous monitoring. This wasn't merely superior logistics. This represented industrial warfare implemented on a scale that European military doctrine had never envisioned as possible. The German soldiers witnessing these endless convoys had no way of understanding that what they observed represented only a tiny fraction of total American military production. For every jeep rolling past their positions in Belgium or France, 10 additional jeeps were being manufactured in factories across the American Midwest. For every truck carrying supplies to frontline units, 5 more trucks were being loaded at ports in Cherbourg, Le Havre, and Antwerp. American industry had achieved something unprecedented in military history: the ability to produce military equipment faster than any conceivable enemy could destroy it, and to deliver that equipment to battlefields with mechanical precision that treated warfare as a manufacturing and distribution problem to be solved through superior organization and higher output. The strategic implications of American logistical superiority became devastatingly clear during Germany's final major offensive operation, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's plan explicitly relied on capturing American fuel depots to sustain the attack beyond its initial phase, because German forces lacked sufficient fuel reserves for extended operations. The irony was profound. Germany's last desperate military gamble depended entirely on stealing American supplies because their own logistics had completely collapsed. Obersturmführer Joachim Paper, commanding a Waffen-SS armored unit during the Ardennes offensive, captured the strategic futility in his post-war testimony. We advanced approximately 50 kilometers during the first 2 days of the attack before fuel shortages completely halted forward movement. Meanwhile, American reinforcement units arrived by truck convoy within 24 hours of our initial breakthrough. They drove to the battlefield fresh and fully equipped. We walked to the battlefield exhausted and undersupplied. They possessed ammunition reserves that allowed continuous artillery bombardment. We rationed every artillery shell and counted machine gun rounds individually. The final outcome was decided not by tactical skill or soldier courage, but by industrial capacity and logistical efficiency. American forces responded to the German offensive with characteristic logistical efficiency that seemed almost supernatural to their opponents. The 101st Airborne Division, completely surrounded at Bastogne, was resupplied by airdrops and truck convoys that somehow penetrated German defensive lines. American artillery units fired more shells during the first 3 days of the Battle of the Bulge than the German army possessed in its entire remaining ammunition stockpile. Technical Sergeant Michael O'Brien, serving with the 4th Armored Division during the relief of Bastogne, recorded his observations of American logistics under combat conditions. Jeeps and trucks continued moving through blizzard conditions like it was peacetime highway driving. Fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, medical supplies, hot food preparations, everything surrounded troops needed was somehow getting through German lines. Germans must have thought we could drive through solid walls or make vehicles invisible. Reality was that we had so many supply routes and so many vehicles that they couldn't possibly interdict all of them simultaneously. The endless American convoys had evolved beyond simple logistical operations to become symbols of an entirely different philosophy of warfare. European military doctrine, developed over centuries of resource scarcity, emphasized conservation, careful planning, and acceptance of material limitations as fundamental strategic constraints. American doctrine, forged by industrial abundance, emphasized overwhelming force supplied continuously until victory was achieved regardless of material cost. This philosophical difference extended to every aspect of military operations. German forces repaired equipment until it was completely unusable, then cannibalized unusable equipment for spare parts to repair other equipment. American forces replaced equipment at the first sign of mechanical problems, then used the replaced equipment for spare parts or training purposes. German forces planned operations around available supplies. American forces planned operations around strategic objectives, then produced whatever supplies were necessary to achieve those objectives. If you're finding this deep dive into the industrial aspects of World War II as fascinating as we are, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're planning an entire series exploring how American industrial capacity changed the fundamental nature of modern warfare, and there are so many incredible details that never make it into conventional military histories. By February 1945, German intelligence reports acknowledged complete defeat in what had become known internally as the Logistics War. Wehrmacht units across all theaters were reporting American supply convoys operating with total impunity throughout territories that were theoretically under German defensive control. A final German intelligence assessment, dated March 15, 1945, represents an official acknowledgement of strategic defeat. American supply capacity has achieved absolute superiority across all operational theaters. Enemy vehicles operate without concern for interdiction attempts. German forces lack capability to significantly impact enemy logistics operations through any available tactical or operational means. Strategic recommendation: focus remaining defensive resources on prepared positions for inevitable Allied ground advance rather than attempting futile anti-logistics operations. The end was not merely military defeat in traditional terms, it represented complete industrial exhaustion. Germany had been outproduced, outsupplied, and outsustained by an economic system that treated warfare as a manufacturing and logistics problem to be solved through superior organization and higher output rather than through tactical innovation or soldier quality. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, reflecting on the strategic lessons in his post-war memoir, acknowledged the fundamental nature of German defeat. "We lost this war not on battlefields where soldiers fought with courage and skill, but in factories where workers produced the materials of war. We were defeated not by superior tactics or better generals, but by superior production capacity and logistical efficiency. The endless jeeps that never stopped moving were visible symptoms of an industrial system we could never hope to match with European methods of warfare. The German soldiers who first witnessed those endless convoys during the summer and autumn of 1944 had been observing the visible manifestation of American industrial transformation. Every individual jeep represented not merely a vehicle, but an entire supply chain extending backward to iron mines in Minnesota, rubber plantations in Brazil, oil fields in Texas, and assembly lines in Michigan. Every truck carried the cumulative output of thousands of American workers who had retooled their entire economy for military production. The psychological impact on both armies created lasting effects that extended far beyond the immediate military situation. German veterans consistently described feeling helpless against an enemy that possessed apparently unlimited material resources. American veterans remembered the confidence that came from knowing supplies would always be available, reinforcements would always arrive on schedule, and equipment would always be replaced when damaged or destroyed. Today, military historians recognize the period from June 1944 to May 1945 as the first comprehensive example of true industrial warfare. Armed conflict decided not by traditional military virtues like tactical skill or soldier courage, but by productive capacity and logistical efficiency implemented on unprecedented scales. The endless American convoys that so shocked German soldiers established the strategic template for all subsequent modern military operations, where victory depends as much on supply chain management as on battlefield tactics. The jeeps themselves have become historical artifacts, carefully preserved in museums and private collections throughout the world. But their true historical significance extends far beyond their mechanical specifications or battlefield performance statistics. These vehicles represented the precise moment when industrial capacity became the decisive factor in global military conflicts, fundamentally altering how wars would be fought for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. Modern highways throughout Europe follow routes first established by Red Ball Express drivers during 1944 and 1945. Rest stops and fuel stations occupy locations where American supply depots once operated continuously around the clock. The road infrastructure itself carries the permanent imprint of those massive logistics operations that seemed so impossible to German observers. But the deeper legacy remains strategic and philosophical. The lesson learned by German soldiers in 1944, that modern warfare is ultimately industrial warfare decided by productive capacity rather than military skill, has shaped strategic planning by every major military power since 1945. No nation today would attempt significant military operations without first ensuring comprehensive logistical support systems. The endless American convoys established logistics as a fundamental military requirement equal in strategic importance to weapons development, troop training, and tactical planning. Before we conclude this investigation into one of World War II's most decisive yet overlooked factors, make sure you've subscribed to our channel for more detailed explorations of the hidden industrial and technological stories that shaped modern history. There's so much more to discover about how American production capacity changed not just the outcome of World War II, but the entire nature of global conflict in the modern era. The sight that so profoundly shocked Wehrmacht Oberstleutnant Hans Müller in October 1944, headlights stretching beyond the horizon, vehicles flowing like an endless mechanical river, marked the definitive end of traditional European methods of warfare and the beginning of the industrial military age. Those jeeps never stopped because they represented something far more significant than simple transportation. They were the visible symbols of an industrial system committed to achieving victory through overwhelming material superiority rather than through tactical brilliance or individual heroism. In the end, the German soldiers were absolutely correct to be shocked by what they witnessed. The endless American convoys represented not merely superior logistics, but the emergence of an entirely new form of warfare where victory belonged not to the most skilled or courageous armies, but to the industrial systems that could produce more, transport more, and sustain more than their enemies could possibly destroy. The roads of Europe in 1944 and 1945 became the stage for the first act of modern industrial warfare, written one jeep, one truck, one endless convoy at a time.